studio ever since 10:05 a.m. You came early today. Harry Siemens, how you doing, man? How's it going?
It
How's things been since the last time we spoke?
it's going good, and I've tried to make that a practice of being early, not exactly for everything, but when I spent 15 years doing real radio when it was real radio back from 71 to 85, and often I talked about it the other day. You'd have a 30-second break in a commercial, put in a cart, and you could actually run to the washroom and come back in that 30 seconds. So, but dead air was absolutely a no-no, and so
Yeah.
that's why here I am. Yeah, it's a real mixed bag once again. We had it was interesting on Saturday afternoon. I picked up a couple of my grandchildren to take them to Icebergs, which is a drive-in restaurant here in Winkler. And the sun was shining, and all of a sudden I had a few drops of rain or moisture on my car. And I couldn't figure out exactly. Obviously, it had to come from above, but nobody was spitting and but it didn't look like anything. And then things started to happen. Things started to swirl. And by the time I got home, an hour later, we had a thunderstorm and we had a half an inch
Yeah.
of rain, and which was really welcome. But 6 miles north of Winkler, nothing. At Morris, Manitoba, 25 millimeters, another a whole inch of rain. And so we've got a mixed bag. I have a trucker friend, John Weed, who drives all over the place. In 1 minute he's here, or I should say 1 hour. And so he's coming back from Killarney on Friday, and it's pouring rain. And he says, it looks like everybody's going to get rain. All of a sudden, he says, Harry, I see the sun shining above Winkler.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's kind of a snapshot of what is happening right now, and the crops are suffering in some places. Some places, when you're getting heat plus 30 and you don't have real moisture, then of course we start to see some suffering.
Yeah, and it's funny because on Saturday I was out for a bike ride here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, of course, and there were some parts of the sky that were like, man, it looks like it's going to be coming down, but there are other parts in there were no clouds in the sky, so it was very, very interesting that it was like that in other places in Manitoba too. But just speaking about moisture, just with the inconsistencies of rain, of course, rain's so necessary to a good crop of what it is, as you've mentioned too. Just is there ways that farmers could maybe use some of their own water from their house? And like, I know farms are big, but I'm guessing not. There's no way to really get around it.
No, we have, excuse me, we have irrigation ponds, and those are for potatoes. But all the irrigation ponds, and they're above ground, and they depend on runoff water, as I've mentioned before, in spring. The snow runoff, it comes
Yeah.
down the streams and rivers, and the guys get their big pumps out there, and they pump as quickly as they can and try and fill up those big storages above ground. But this year they're all empty. As I understand it, there will be no irrigation of
Wow.
potatoes going on for that reason. And irrigation for potatoes isn't just for lack of moisture. Irrigation for potatoes is also a management practice to get the optimum growth out of those plants. And the potato manufacturing, the French fry, Portage la Prairie and at Carberry, they will not take potatoes from farmers, or they will not sign contracts with farmers that don't have access to irrigation. So what exactly is happening this year? Obviously, those plants will want all the potatoes they can get. But if it doesn't rain, potatoes are about 90% water. And so they need moisture and more moisture and moisture. As a kid, 18, 17 years old, I worked in a potato storage in Plum Coulee, which was my hometown, and I had the privilege of getting to know the potato business, from all aspects, and it's a really intricate business, very high cost, and also good high returns. But when it doesn't rain, then it's mostly costs and not nearly as much return.
So potatoes will probably be suffering from what you've been telling me just about right now. Just are there any other in terms of stuff other than potatoes that you see particularly that could be suffering as well moving forward?
Again, the plant breeders of the past and of the present have been really good at breeding varieties that become even more drought tolerant than others. And so, the plant breeders have done whatever they could in order to breed in traits that they can bear, survive. But there comes a time when, number one, you're out of moisture at the bottom where your root is. And again, the roots, somebody told me the other day, they have a really nice way of looking for water. They'll go down, but you can only go down so far. And then if you don't have the moisture, it's like then with the heat that we're having, anytime it hits, 27, 28, 30, 31, which is really good growing weather if you got adequate moisture. But if you don't have adequate moisture, it does the opposite. It starts to suffocate and dry up the plant. And so that's, yeah, I saw some canola. I see canola blooming just west of Winkler. And it's a bit early, I think, for canola to be blooming. So it's blooming because that crop came up prematurely and started to send out flowers. And so, what will happen with that crop? It'll be interesting. Wheat, some wheat, and all. And again, it varies from the east to the north to the northwest to the southwest to the east and so forth. And so it all depends on how much moisture you had in the winter, and how much moisture you got in spring, and how much moisture you're going to be getting now. That's really what the whole essence of what the crop will be like when come harvest in August.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Do you feel like with the early blooming of just crops like canola and other stuff just blooming early, do you feel like we could see an increase in just the number of sales this year of just stuff like canola going fast on the market?
Well, we actually the canola is at record high prices. In fact, it's been
Yeah,
higher. It's come
right.
down,
Yeah,
right? And the
yeah.
reason it's in record high prices is because of the supply having diminished from last year. I mean, canola demand keeps going up, and there's two reasons for that. Number one, China, they want to buy canola when it's not too expensive because they need lots of it, canola products, oil and meal, and so forth. And but at the same time, with the new fuel standards, with the climatic fuel standards, canola is now a product that they're using to add to the fuel because it's not a fossil fuel. They can make fuel out of it, and so we talked about it. I think last week, where this plant, your company is building a plant in Northgate, Saskatchewan. Sure, they want to take and sell, crush the oil or crush the canola for oil and meal. Meal goes to animals, oil goes to human consumption. But they're now including that oil in the new fuel standards, meaning adding it to the gasoline. And so that demand is becoming quite significant, especially in the United States and also here in Western Canada.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's great that it's been added to stuff like that. Just in terms of just the hot days coming up here, I've never farmed before. I'm gonna be honest with you, Harry. So I don't know the ins
That's
and outs of
okay.
this, but just what's it like for farmers during the hot months here in the summer here in Manitoba, especially just trying to stay as cool as they can out there when the heat is the highest.
Well, most farmers, unless you have, some real significant hand labor crops, and if you're talking vegetables, in some cases you need more people working outside. But for the most part, any farmer that's out there, whether it's his pickup, his car, his tractor, his swather, his combine, they all have air conditioned cabs by now. And so that part of it isn't the issue. It's the issue when you get out. You're sitting in an air conditioned cab, at whatever temperature you have it, and you get out and you need to do something strenuous, and bingo, the heat can just really suck out the energy, and so that's the issue. So you have to be careful for heat stroke. I'm one. I have to be really careful. I last summer I went out to with my family to the beach at Morden, and I got heat stroke, and so this
Yeah.
year it's almost like I'm avoiding any real heat because I can feel it. It still hangs on, and once you've had it once, you got to be careful. And so that's the other side of it. But no, for the most part, we've got people that make hay. I think one other thing I'd like to say about the lack of moisture, the big challenge that we have is our pastures for our cattle. We've got most of our cattle. I have a friend at Langrooth, Manitoba, which is west of Lake. Yeah, it's not in the Interlake; it's west of the lakes, and so he has 450 head of we call it cow calf pairs. That's where a cow has had a calf, and so they have so that means there's 900 animals. Those 900 animals need to be fed, and so he has to manage his feed because the grass is not growing when you don't have moisture, and the grass just doesn't grow, and it's been dry in that area. So that's a challenge. And you know what? We may have other areas that have feed, but the trucking costs make it almost prohibitive to bring in feed from another area. It's just not worth it to feed to the animals. Then they may as well just sell off the animals and not have to spend extra money on feed and lose more money. So it's a challenge right now for the cattle industry and anybody that has horses, sheep, whatever it is, any of those animals that depend on the grass. We hear a lot about grass-fed beef and so forth. Well, if there isn't grass, then you can't have grass-fed
Yeah.
beef.
Yeah.
So that's another challenge.
Yeah, like you said, it's as simple as that. If there's no grass, you can't have that grass fed beef. And I think we'll get into just the ins and outs of what farmers are feeding their animals in next week's edition of the show,
Sure.
because we got to bring on our next guest here in just a few moments. But let's end off with this question: just what is Harry's farming tip of the week for farmers here in Manitoba?
I think I already shared it in part. I'm telling my farmer friends, male and female, that be careful for that heat. Make sure that you have water. If you're working outside, again, a lot of these people, I don't need to tell them that; they don't know it. But that's the farmers to be careful. And I think I haven't said enough about being safe. I drove yesterday. I came into Winkler, and I was behind a big sprayer. The wheels are twice as big as my car, right? And this guy's driving beside me, and he went through the red light in front of me. I stopped. I almost went through the red light because he kept trucking. So we have to be careful. Farm machinery moves slowly. In some cases, it moves erratically, and so we have to be careful as both ways, the farmer and we who are driving on those roads, that we don't get into a collision with a farm vehicle unnecessarily.
Well, there it is. Harry Siemens, tip of the week here on the Farm Report. Harry, thank you so much for joining me once again for another week on the Farm Report. We'll be seeing you next week, and we'll be talking more about what's happening in agriculture here in Manitoba. Have a wonderful rest of your day, man. It was great talking to you again.
Thank you very much. And that Siemens says.
Yeah, Siemens says. Siemens says. For sure, for sure. So we'll let Harry go now. I'll be back with the final guest on today's edition of Rise and Shine Manitoba. Stick with us. More Rise and Shine Manitoba coming up here on ASTV Productions.